I'm sorry, Xeno fans. More or less just on a whim, I kinda decided to make the last bit of October focusing on non-Xeno related content. So, for the next week or so, you're basically gonna see this Final Fantasy XIV video, a Trails video that I've already recorded, and then on Halloween itself there will be a very, very loosely themed Xenoblade 3 video, as well as I'm gonna try to get at least 2 Bat and Kaito streams in, one of which may have already happened by the time you're watching this. Then heading into the holiday season when ad revenue's at its peak, I'm going to make both you and me happy by stopping procrastinating a couple of the big Xeno videos that I've been wanting to make but have found it hard to start, so you might finally get Riku. That being said though, this is an FF14 video, and it is on future speculation, so it will contain spoilers for the main scenario quest up through 6.5, as well as a couple pieces of Endwalker side content. This video is being recorded in the hype post-European FanFest, and the Japanese one is still several months away, so there'll be nothing about 6.55 or anything revealed in that FanFest if you're watching this at a later date. Dawntrail is supposed to be a summer vacation type expansion, filled with new adventures and new locations, and what kind of summer vacation would it be if you didn't have a little bit of friendly competition with some of your closest friends and allies? One of the major plot hooks for this expansion is going to be that the Scions of the 7th Dawn will be divided into 2 groups, taking part in a succession contest on different sides in order to determine who the new ruler of Tuliolal will be. As of now, 2 FanFests in and only part of an MSQ patch to go, we have no idea who's going to be with us and who's going to be against us for this competition. So I'm just going to do a bit of speculating and discuss which choices for teams for each character would be good or bad. Do keep in mind, I'm under no illusion that this Scions divided plotline is actually going to last the entirety of the expansion or even the entirety of 7.0. I'm going to be real, I'm expecting it to become a non-issue by the level 93 trial, if that. We're going to get maybe one dungeon with a few other Scions as bosses that we treat as a sparring match, and maybe a solo instance where we fight against the bodyguards of the other team's candidate for the throne alongside the Scions, and that's gonna be about it. For the most part, it's going to be about splitting up the party and shrinking the amount of characters we have to deal with for the first part of the MSQ before whatever the real big deal is going to be, because I highly doubt the Allegan/Mako reactor looking stuff that we've seen in a couple of the dungeon concepts is going to have to do with where we're going to try and find the Golden City, or whatever the protocols and activities that need to be done for the succession competition are. I am going to be real, I don't have a lot of faith in this specific plot point meaning anything after the entire 6.x series is going to be about just going on adventures again lasted for literally 1 patch. That being said, there's a lot of really interesting character stuff you can do with the Scions, just based on whether they're with or against us, the Warrior of Light, and who their teammates are, so I'm curious as to what the character interactions are going to be. I've kinda identified 3 different points that would make which team of characters on interesting. The first is, are they put with other Scions that they haven't interacted with a lot before? Basically, will splitting the party allow character conversations that might not usually have happened, happen? This also includes us as the Warrior of Light. Are characters who haven't gotten a lot of spotlight going to be paired with us, so they can get to shine more without more popular ones in the way? Stuff like that. The second one is, will they be put with any new characters who might be foils to them or further the development or show how far they have in fact grown? This one I won't be talking about because we obviously don't know anything about any of the new characters that will be introduced in this expansion yet. It just goes to reason that each team is going to be at the very least accompanied by their candidate for the throne, so that's at least 2 new characters that different subgroups of the Scions are going to have to interact with, and depending on how they're written, that could be a good or a bad thing. And then the last one is splitting up duos, making characters who work together a lot be forced to go against each other and see how they operate without someone who's usually been at their side. Will that bring new things out of them? Will they feel inadequate? And how do they feel about competing against someone they've been aligned with for so long? It unfortunately doesn't seem like we're getting a whole lot of this, but there's one case that you could argue falls under this that I think would be really cool if it happens. With that being said, what characters are we going to have to work with that we know about already? The first bit is extremely easy. It's just the entire Trust cast of Endwalker minus 0, because she's still off doing her stuff in the 13th. I don't think we're going to be pulling Reen out of the first to help us on this one, so it looks like the starting bit of our roster is just going to be the Warrior of Light, Alphino, Alize, Thancred, Urianger, Y'shtola, Estinian, and Grahatia. But that is not going to be all. In addition to a statement from the EU FanFest that says that we're going to get a lot more new characters in duty support, again, new characters, can't really speculate on this a lot, it's also extremely likely that Kryl is going to be raised to the position of main cast member, as that's been pretty heavily hinted at. She's already received a letter from Taral that's probably going to have her go there with us, and she's pretty much a shoo-in for being the poster girl for the new caster job, whatever that turns out being. The devs really like making sure each new job is given as a duty support option at least once in the expansion it's introduced, so she's probably going to be with us for at least one dungeon. That being said, I don't think we're going to have a Viper representative out of the Scions. Only one main cast member gets a job change each expansion, and the other new job for that expansion is represented by another major character that's not going to be a main one going forward. In Endwalker, Alphino became a Sage, and while Xenos was the MSQ representative of Reaper, we also got Zero as a reskin version for 3 dungeons. In Shadowbringers, Thancred became a Gunbreaker, and we also got Lena as a reskin Dancer as one of our DPS options for Holminster Switch. And then in Stormblood, Alize became a Red Mage, and we got both Gosetsu and Hien as Samurai. They actually held to forcing you to take each new job into a dungeon at least once when they backported duty support to Stormblood, by the way. You are required to take Alize as a DPS in Castrum Abania, and duty support Gosetsu is a tank samurai a la FF11. I'm pretty sure just so you're forced to take at least one out of him and Hien if you use duty support for Bardam's Medal. Basically, just because Viper is Meteor's canon job for this expansion doesn't mean we're not going to get a new Viper character who's going to look cool in the MSQ to encourage people to try the job out, and who's also going to be a duty support option for at least one dungeon. I actually have a pretty decent idea who that character is going to be, and to discuss that, we're going to need to talk about the second and third characters who I think are going to be part of this whole succession contest. The second one has already been shown in the trailer, and that is Erenville. While we don't know if he's a combatant, he's at the very least going on the boat with us to Taral, and will probably be the one to show us the sights when we first arrive in Tuliolal, and I actually think he's a pretty decent candidate to be the narrator of this expansion. I do actually think Erenville will go adventuring with us, just simply because he appears to be somewhat close to someone on the team for the candidate we're going to be backing in the succession contest. Like, he went back home to Taral in 6.4, and here he is in 6.5, all the way back in Charlian, going by boat, not by Aetheryte, mind you. So either time dilation between shards happened, and we were either on the Void or back in the First for longer than we expected, or he was convinced to go all the way back just to give us a job when he could very easily have written a letter. So something's going on here. While he could just be a guide, Erenville is a gleaner tasked with finding samples from abroad, so I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility for him to be a combatant as well. I think it would be cool to see how he fights, just because we don't really know anything about Viera culture in the New World. Pretty much all we've gotten is stuff from Dalmasca. Some of them exist in Charlian apparently, and we don't know if they're all immigrants. And then stuff about the First, which doesn't really help a whole lot with the source. So it would be neat to see him have another job reskinned and just be like, ah yes, Viera clans in Taral have developed a fighting style based on certain conditions that happens to be very close to insert other thing from other job based in Eorzea or something like that. Could he just be the Viper representative? Yeah, but I actually think that's going to be a different character, and the only other one we know as a fact is going to be in the expansion because it's the person who is teased at the end of 6.5. The fandom seems to have taken to call this character Legs because the model is just legs, and that's absolutely hilarious, so I'm going with that for the rest of this video. Common theory seems to be that this is going to be our important female Hrothgar rep because they'll be shown off right before 6.55 most likely, and that this is the woman speaking at the end of the Dawntrail trailer as that appears to be a voice actor that we've never heard in the game at all before. I agree with all of this, and I just think it would make more sense for the new character to be the Viper rep, just kind of based on intuition. This person, we don't know if they've been away from Tyrell very often, while Erenville's been kind of around the entire world, so he's less likely to be using the job that's literally just a traditional Tyrelli hunting technique. The only issue is we don't really know anything about legs besides what we've just talked about. So I can't really give any more input than that, other than this is the person tasking us with taking part in the succession competition, so they are most likely going to be actively working with our team, which means they're pretty likely to be a combatant who will be with us for duty support, and just makes the most sense to be Viper to me. It's also my guess that they're going to do something very similar to Gosetsu being introduced to hype up Stormblood, and that is that Legs is not the candidate we're going to be backing for the throne in the competition. They're going to be a retainer similar to Gosetsu to Hien, and being the one going on their lord or whoever's behalf to ask for our aid. And again, that's just kind of intuition. I don't think someone actively competing for the throne would want to leave to go to another continent right before the competition starts. That just kind of seems like it would be bad optics to me. But sending their right hand out to go request the aid of the greatest hero of the three great continents, that hits a bit differently, and I think might play a bit better back home. I'd also like to draw your attention to a slide that was in both FanFest keynotes that's just a bit of a blurb about the basic plot of Dawntrail. The most important part of this says, alongside Alphino, Alizé, and Erenville, the Warrior of Light embarks on a journey across the Indigo Deep. Should rumor be true, the contest may lead them to the fabled gates of a city of gold. We've seen Erenville and very small bits of Alphino on the boat in the trailer already, so it seems likely that two of our teammates are going to be Alizé and Alphino, and I wouldn't be surprised if this expansion starts in Charlian, and we're gonna get like one scene with at least one of the Levior parents being like, hey, can you take the kids with you? Watch out for them, make sure they don't get hurt too much fighting Thancred or something like that. It's also very important to mention that the third line of dialogue, little do they know that it will also see the Scions divided, explicitly says the number 2 in the Japanese text, suggesting that we will only be split into 2 teams. This could be a misdirect, but it is nice to have at least a soft bit of confirmation for something like that, because there are 3 different sets of invitations going out. We have Erenville in Legs, specifically targeting us. We have the letter Kryl found, which while it's old and not originally intended for her, is still a separate piece of motivation to head across the ocean compared to the other ones. And then we also have the mysterious client that Thancred and Urianger were talking about, who's looking for specifically Archons. And that could specify 3 different teams, but it's actually very likely that Kryl will either stay neutral or join our team instead, because it seems like her letter came from Galul Jaja, who is the current ruler of Tuliolal, and was obviously addressed to Galuf because he seems to have been there before. And I'm not entirely sure if someone whose grandfather has a connection to the current ruler of the city would be considered impartial enough to participate in a contest to determine the next ruler of the city. So my guess would be Kryl is either going to be on our team to show off the new caster, or neutral and working at something behind the scenes, or just officiating the competition. And then whenever something villainous happens that's outside the realm of just the succession, she'll come with us and join us for the rest of the dungeons and just be a duty support NPC for the rest of the expansion, and probably some of the post-patch stuff as long as we stay in Tyrell for that. So based on that, it seems like we have 5 members of our team pretty reasonably locked in. For combatants, we have ourself, Alphino, Alizé, and probably Legs. And for other characters, Erenville as a guide, and whoever the candidate we're backing is, either as a combatant or just as someone we're helping out. I am guessing, just because it's a common trope in stuff like this, that at least one of the candidates for the throne is going to be a child currently. Like, Galul Jaja doesn't seem to be dying anytime soon, so I think this is just to set up whoever the successor is way ahead of time. So there's a decent chance that at least one of the teams is going to be propping up a child who fully intends to learn about becoming a ruler in the massive amount of time they're going to have before they actually take the throne. I don't know if that's going to be our candidate or not, though. My guess would be the opposite team is going to have more Scions than our team, and as such, they're more likely to go with the child ruler trope, and our candidate is more likely to be at least a teenager or something, and able to fight alongside us if there's any battle-related stuff in the competition itself. It is going to seem nice and nostalgic like early Shadowbringers stuff, or even back to Coils, to just kind of be going on an adventure with Alphinaud, Alisaie, and a few new lesser-known characters, but I can't help but think it's a bit of a missed opportunity to split the twins up and have them on opposite sides. We did obviously get some of them being separated and the angst and character development from that at the end of Stormblood and beginning of Shadowbringers, but throughout all of their Endwalker trials and tribulations, they've been together. They were helping with Garlemald throughout most of the post-MSQ, and they were just with each other and none of the other main characters, so bringing them back with the rest of the Scions and then just having them together again seems a little bit like there's something they could have done with splitting them apart from each other. But if they do what I think they might do with this plot, I could see why they'd have them together and with us, because having the two youngest members of the Scions, along with Kryl, who's not really even a formal member, would actually make this really interesting on a thematic level. I know people are worried about Alphinaud because we haven't seen him directly in the trailer yet, but I think the Occam's Razor explanation that all of his major shots also have Kryl in them is just the correct one. Kryl might even get her new outfit in 6.55 and not even the beginning of 7.0, so it would make sense for her to be wearing it in the trailer, so yeah, I'm kind of just going with that. I don't really know what to tell you. He's clearly not the one doing the job change because he's still in his Sage outfit, and we've basically seen his entire body except for his face. The other theories are that he somehow gets injured in 6.55. I kind of doubt that. It seems like it's mostly just going to be conversation, talking about the different teams and us deciding to go to the new world in the first place. He could be wearing an eye patch because he wants to feel like a pirate. I'd be completely okay with that. That's entirely in character for him to do. And people are also saying that maybe he got a new hairstyle, or that he's finally starting his growth spurt and his face looks a little different. But he and Alisaie are identical twins, and she looks exactly the same. So I don't know about that. Maybe he'll be ditching the ponytail, and for some reason they're choosing that as a character moment for him. That's the only other reason I could think of besides just Kryl stuff. So I think the twins are pretty set in what they're going to be doing. As for the other Scions, the most likely people to be on the opposite team from us are Thancred and Urianger. They got a separate summons from a different client who's specifically asking for Archons, and it seems like both of them were requested. So them backing a different candidate just, again, kind of seems like the most simple explanation. And this leads to what could potentially be the theme for the team divisions, and that is Archons versus non-Archons. If you think about it, that would kind of make a whole lot of sense, because you would then have Thancred, Urianger, Y'shtola, and G'raha versus more or less everyone else, and that really just is the longest standing members of the Scions, the people who've worked with Louisoix for the longest, and besides Estinian, the oldest and wisest characters around, so it would be a sort of youth versus experience thing, and just maybe a comparing and contrasting of different styles and opinions on how things would work. And perhaps even the philosophies of the candidates themselves could reflect that. I might be wrong. Maybe the other team's candidate is older, and our team's is younger, maybe someone similar to Reen that the twins can relate to, or something like that. Obviously, Thancred and Urianger being on the same team has the same missed opportunity. You would be intentionally not splitting up one of the closest duos of characters in the entire main cast, but if they're going to be the core that entire team is built around, having them together would make sense. The next character I need to talk about, though, is Estinian, because I'm going to do something slightly contentious and talk about Final Fantasy XIV power scaling, which, now that Dynamis and the Duty Finder have been made canon, kind of doesn't exist anymore, but honestly, I think Estinian cannot be on the same team as us for any sort of combat or battle skill related competition in this whole succession thing to make any sense. He's consistently portrayed as, if not stronger than us, the only Scion who can directly match us when it comes to a 1v1. So putting us on the same team means you would more or less have to give the other team basically the entire rest of the main cast for them to remotely stand a chance if we do ever directly have to come to blows. And I don't really think they're going to do that. There is also a second possibility that I think is very funny that may just be true. Pay attention to how all of the Scions are depicted in the trailer. Barring Meteor fighting Galul Jaja and Alphino only being seen on the boat, most of the Scions are just doing quote-unquote touristy things. Alisaie and G'raha are trying out food. Thancred's asking for directions while Urianger's chilling with a drink and watching over him. Y'shtola's doing some sort of archaeological or scholarly thing, examining some sort of carving in the capital that she's looking directly at because the developers forgot she's supposed to be blind again. And then there's Estinian. He's out there already making friends with a bunch of the locals, soloing an S-rank hunt, and showing off what I really hope is going to be the Dragoon level 100 ability. He's also talking about a worthy opponent, so honestly, it kind of seems like he went to Taral ahead of us just to try and find new powerful things to fight, ended up making friends with reptiles again, and is just kind of going to be doing his own thing there. We might not get full-on Scion party member Estinian like we did in Endwalker. We might just be getting Stormblood Estinian, where he's around, he's going to help us when plot happens, but for the most part, he's off doing his own thing and trying to fight people. There's also a very, very distinct possibility that he'll be on his own team. Yeah, the slide only mentioned the Scions being divided into two, but you could very easily talk around that if only one Scion's on a third team. At the very least, I do expect at least another team that has no main characters as members of it, just to contrast something, or maybe we have a dungeon that's us fighting through another team that focuses on quantity over quality, so like the first two bosses are from that team. Then we fight like an ad rush just of Scions on the third boss, something like that. But I could also see there being a fourth team where the contestant maybe is also a combatant or something, and hired just Estinian as a bodyguard. And I could 100% see Estinian doing that too. There's none of the first brood in Taral as far as we know, but I could easily see him being clued into a child of like Tiamat or Hresvelgar, who isn't Great Worm status, but is still a pretty big and old dragon who's friends with a certain candidate for the throne, and when asked for someone who's not a dragon to help out, and that's how he ended up there ahead of us. Honestly, not really a lot to say about this. I think it's very fitting for Estinian, and really, for him, as much as I like his character, I just don't want him on our team, simply because it would make anything being a challenge kind of completely beyond my suspension of disbelief. Yeah, there is the issue of us just having the Azim crystal, but I'm pretty sure something along those lines would just kind of be banned through the rules of the competition, and I see no reason why we would attempt to cheat in this, when, at least between the Scion teams, it's mostly going to be a friendly competition, unless one of the candidates ends up being evil, which doesn't seem particularly likely. So my guess would be the trials are not going to be directly related to this plotline. Next up, we have Y'shtola, and I'm gonna be real, I have no idea what they're going to do with her character in this expansion. It seems kind of likely that she's just going to get sidelined until we actually do something with shard travel again, because that's where all of her character motivation is stored right now. So unless very early on in Dawntrail we hear something about them also doing the kind of big Void Gate thing we figured out with the Thavnarian alchemists, she's probably just going to take a backseat, say a couple sassy things to get the haha funnies out, and more or less be there to fill a seat. Considering how we're pretty likely to have Alisaie on our team as a caster, and if we have Kryl, she will also be a caster, I think it's perfectly reasonable to just stick Y'shtola on another team for now, and have her not really do a lot, just to try and put focus away from the fact that she's not going to really have anything to do in general until the story decides to go back to the plotline that's her main focus. And then we have G'raha, and while I'm not the biggest fan of just splitting the teams between Archons and non-Archons, he is the character I think would benefit the most from this specific team division. While yes, we won't be splitting up the inseparable pairs of Alphino and Alisaie and Thancred and Urianger, we would be splitting up Graha, and ourselves. And I think making him compete directly against us is the most interesting thing that could possibly be done to his character at the current point in time. I'm pretty sure I'm not alone when I say that the Crystal Exarch side of Graha, the one where he still has a great amount of reverence and appreciation for us, but is a seasoned, wise leader who's mastered multiple fighting styles, and even though he's not really aware of it himself, is outright better than us at a lot of things, is a much better character than Uwu simply following you around everywhere Graha, and really the only time we got to see the former in Endwalker was during the final days at Radz-at-Han, and in his Ultima Thule speech. Then he was for the most part sidelined during the post-patch MSQ, and while he was there for Myths of the Realm, he was basically stuck doing research, so character-wise, we didn't really get a lot of either side of him. For Dawntrail, if they make him go against us, and his teammates make him realize that he has a bunch of different advantages over us, him choosing to use the contest as a way not to prove himself to us, but to prove himself to himself, to show that he's worthy of standing alongside us, not just as a follower, but as an equal peer who's capable of making up for our weak points in different ways, that would go extremely hard for his character. Like, I would love the idea of Thancred and Urianger being the ones to first get the invitation, then they decide to invite a couple other Archons they know and are close with. Who knows, maybe we'll get some new Archon characters coming with them from Charlene to be on their team or something like that. And then when they get to Taral and their team starts setting itself up, Thancred will go like, no, I'm an espionage specialist who started out as a stealth fighter, and Urianger's a devilish, devious, planny guy who's not really good at the spotlight either. Our team leader is going to be Graha Tia, this guy who has decades more experience than anyone else, and has a ton of knowledge on how to lead properly in a much bigger group than this. Someone who could even give you advice on how to be a ruler once you win the competition. That, I think, would be a really, really cool moment for his character. Like, instead of the themes of the teams being Archons versus non-Archons, or younger versus older, them being Team Graha versus Team Warrior of Light, which they're more or less using as an elaborate sparring exercise to drive each other to greater heights than ever before, I would be extremely down for that. Just imagine a dungeon where the first boss is Thancred, the second boss is Y'shtola as a DPS with Urianger either untargetable or as a secondary target healing and buffing her, just to sort of mirror their Ultima Thule scene, and then the final boss is another tag team against Graha and whoever that team's candidate for the throne is. Estinian's got all his flashy powers derived from Nidhogg, but besides that, Graha with his ability to switch between 3 different jobs, which is more than any other Scion can do besides us, is the character with the most complexity to make into a final dungeon boss. I don't think he's going to be a trial as cool as that would be, but I think it would be a very, very big missed opportunity to not do something like that. We are definitely going to fight the other Scions at some point. I just don't want it to be relegated only to solo duties. And again, just as a character thing, if we go through a gauntlet of Scions, I think it would be really neat if most of them are going to be going all out, just trying to see how far they can push us, while Estinian and Graha are the ones who are going in, actively trying to win. This is cool and all, and I really like the possibilities from this. The only issue is purely gameplay focused, because pay attention to the role balance of the teams. In addition to ourselves, the characters I'm saying we're likely to have are going to be Alphino, who is caster/healer, Kryl, who is newly becoming a caster and as such probably won't be allowed to go back to healer for this expansion, and Alize, who is a one-trick caster, plus Legs, who I am guessing to be melee DPS. Meanwhile, the Archon team has the only 2 tanks in the Scions. That could definitely be an issue if we're not going through the story as tank. However, in addition to the keynote outright stating we're going to get a lot of new characters, though granted Legs could be one of those, I've also already said that we're probably going to have 2 more people on our team, Erenville and our actual candidate, and they could just very, very easily make one of those a one-trick tank. Again, we don't know if Erenville's a combatant or not, but if he is, he just kind of gives me tanking vibes for some reason. And while we don't really know a lot about Turali combat arts besides the fact that Viper does exist over there and that's where blue magic originated, there's more than enough wiggle room to justify including a reskin version of Warrior, Paladin, or Dark Knight. Gunbreaker's really the only one you can't justify, and they could even just pull a Gosetsu thing again and have maybe Legs be a tank version of Viper because they're a retainer, and our candidate just be a regular DPS version of Viper. The only role outright missing is Fizz ranged in that situation, but again, you can totally, very easily justify a reskin of at least Bard and Dancer, possibly also Machinist, to exist in Tural. And who knows, I'm kind of thinking that our candidate is actually going to have a second retainer and not just Legs, who just isn't coming to Charlian for 6.55 because they're not going to be a female Hrothgar, so introducing them right away isn't important for hyping up the expansion. And I'm thinking that because it seems like the game is sort of naturally setting into our group size being 8 members to mirror a full party in content terms, even if we're never getting another trial that can be done with duty support. So that would make our full team the Warrior of Light on whatever job we choose to play through Dawntrail with, Alphino on either Sage or his own special version of Arcanist, Alize on Red Mage, Kryl on probably forced to be whatever the new caster is, even though she does have Conjurer experience, Legs, another retainer, our actual candidate for the throne, and Erenville, at least 2 of those characters being a tank, one of them probably being a Fizz ranged, and at least one of them also being a Viper. This would introduce 5 new characters to the duty support ecosystem, both new jobs in the expansion, and give several new characters to us, echoing Yoshi P's statement in the keynote. I'm actually fairly certain that if they do this, other teams will have more members than just whatever Scions happen to be on them, but those teams will also have a few generic members. I'm guessing our team is going to be the smallest ones to try and make us the underdogs, and the other teams are going to have just a lot of generic guards or Turali warriors or something of the like. My guess would also be the core members of another team are going to be Thancred, Oriange, Y'shtola, that team's candidate who may either be a child or someone who is just not able to fight for some other reason, and Grahatia as the leader of a team, while another team may be even smaller and simply consist of Astinian, maybe a couple other bodyguards, and another candidate for the throne. I'm guessing, since he's shown with the Mamulja in the trailer, that he would be backing a Mamulja candidate. Add one other team with no Scions on it, and maybe if you really want to be spicy, throw in a couple characters we do know that just happen to have been invited for the same reason the Scions were. With that, we would have Galul Jaja, the current ruler, 4 candidates for the throne. Each of those will have a couple retainers, and at least the 2 teams that are focused on the most will flesh those retainers out and give them actual names and personalities. So between that, as well as whoever ends up being the antagonist, and they'll probably have a couple of underlings, that more or less is the dozen or so major new voiced characters we get every expansion. So I think this is kind of how it's going to shake out in the end. Of course, as I said, this is definitely not going to be the only plotline the MSQ will go through, and probably will end up not being the main focus, but I could see what I've discussed as a very good framework to build off of and have bigger discoveries and new locations with other new characters come out of, and then when the succession contest gets hijacked by whoever the villains are, we take them out at the end of 7.0, then the first 3 post-expansion patches are about actually finishing the contest, and I don't know. I don't know how you could turn this into an 8-person trial to be either the final boss of 7.0 or the 7.3 trial boss to cap the actual MSQ, but maybe there's some ritual where one of the sides has to turn into a primal and the other side has to fight them, and whoever wins becomes the actual successor. Or we're just going to do a trial that's somehow a giant battle royale or a multi-phase fight where we're just going through every member of every other team or something like that. The possibilities really are endless, but based on what we've been shown, while it isn't what I think would be optimal, I am cautiously very optimistic for how they're choosing to divide the teams up for this competition section of Dawntrail. And yeah, that's all I've got. This video ended up way longer than I was expecting it to, but that happens for most of my videos. I don't know how much more 14 content I'll end up making in the future, So I would like to hear your feedback on it if you made it all the way through this. Especially if you're mainly a Xeno fan and already watch my content. Like, if you made it this far and you're just a 14 fan who happened to find this, then you'd probably just like more from me if you're subscribing off of this or something like that, which by the way, do subscribe if you like the video. But especially Xeno fans, I want to hear your opinions on whether or not you'd want me to include more of this content in the rotation, because there are 2 other 14 videos I know I want to make. The first one is going to be fixing the Endsinger Extreme fight because that wasn't very good. And the second is going to be reimagining Endwalker as if it were 2 expansions like they had slightly planned at one point prior to writing it. So yeah, if you want to hear any of that stuff, make sure you let me know, because not in terms of view count, but in terms of how people are reacting to the video is what's going to determine whether or not I make more 14 content in the future. So make your voice heard. And until next time, be it a new Xeno video, be it the Trails video, or be it something else about this game, this is Luxon, signing off.